Today, we're going to talk about one of the most well-known modern mountaineers. His name is Nirmal Purja. We'll discuss his achievements and the controversies associated with him. And he has more than enough of both. Nirmal Purja, also known as Nims or Nims, was born in Nepal on July 25, 1983, in the small village of Dana in Nepal's Mayagdi district. The village sits at an elevation of about 1,600 meters, not far from the 8,000-meter peak Dhaulagiri, so Nirmal grew up close to the mountains from an early age. His childhood, however, was far from easy. Nepal still has a strong caste system, and his family belonged to a lower caste, which led to financial hardship. Nirmal recalls that his family was so poor that, as a child, he didn't even have a pair of flip-flops. Despite this, Nims went on to attend an English-language boarding school. He did quite well there, and remembers that he never wanted to be a pilot, a doctor, or anything else. As he puts it, to be a Gurkha, that was my only dream growing up, the only thing I wanted to achieve. One of the few ways to break out of caste inequality in that region is through military service. Nirmal's brothers were the first to join the Gurkhas, and he followed in their footsteps. So who are the Gurkhas? They are traditional units of the British Army, recruited from Nepali volunteers since 1815. Gurkhas fought in the Anglo-Sikh Wars, both world wars, and in nearly every conflict involving the United Kingdom. It is an elite unit known for its strict discipline and exceptionally high level of military training. Gurkhas are renowned for their bravery and their traditional kukri knives, which are part of their warrior identity and remain part of their gear to this day. Nirmal joined their ranks in 2003, and not just any unit, but an elite division of British Special Forces for maritime operations. This is how he recalls it. I made a huge leap from a village boy running around in flip-flops to a Special Forces soldier in one of the United Kingdom's elite units. People need to understand that anything is possible if you truly want it and don't give up on your dream. For obvious reasons, Nirmal does not go into detail about his service, but he says he took part in every military operation involving the United Kingdom during his years of service. While still in the military, he began taking his first steps in mountaineering. He completed his first major climb in 2012, reaching the summit of Lobuche East at 6,119 meters, despite having no prior mountaineering experience. On May 18, 2014, he completed a trek and summited Dhaulagiri, 8,167 meters, again without any prior acclimatization, and in just 14 days, what he calls from Kathmandu to Kathmandu. And this is how he comments on it. Ordinary climbers typically need 2 months to do this. That's when I realized I feel completely at home at high altitude. It felt like I could climb mountain summits as casually as taking a walk with a dog in the backyard. That kind of bravado is typical of Nirmal. He often makes bold statements, but to be fair, the results were real. On May 13, 2016, he summited his second 8,000er Everest. Then, on May 15, 2017, Nirmal Purja led a Gurkha expedition and once again summited Everest with 13 fellow soldiers, marking the 200th anniversary of Gurkha service in the British Army. In 2018, he retired with the rank of corporal. That's when his mountaineering career truly began, and he came out swinging. On March 15, 2019, he announced his project called Project Possible 14x7, where he set out to climb all 14 8,000ers in just 7 months within a single season. At the time, it sounded completely unrealistic. Before Nirmal began his climbs, The record for summiting all 8,000ers stood at 7 years, 10 months, and 6 days, held by climber Kim Chang-ho. Before that, the record was 7 years, 11 months, and 14 days, set by the legendary Polish mountaineer Jerzy Kukuczka. In other words, previous records were just under 8 years, while Nirmal claimed he would complete all 8,000ers in just 7 months. The mountaineering community did not take him seriously. Young, ambitious climbers often make bold claims, but they rarely lead anywhere. However, on April 23, 2019, he summited his first 8,000er. It was Annapurna. This peak is considered one of the most dangerous climbs in the world and has one of the highest fatality rates among mountaineers. After successfully summiting Annapurna, Nirmal returned to base camp, where he learned that another climber from Malaysia, Wui Kin Chin, had already been missing for 36 hours. Everyone at base camp believed Wui was already dead, given the effects of extreme altitude and severe weather conditions on Annapurna. Nirmal himself thought the same. The Malaysian climber could no longer be helped, so Nims' team stayed at base camp, celebrating their success until 3:30 in the morning. But at 6 a.m., a helicopter arrived at base camp. A Nepali Sherpa ran to Nirmal's tent and told him that during a flyover of the mountain, they had spotted the Malaysian climber signaling for help at around 7,500 meters. Wui Kin was still waving his arms. However, conditions on the mountain made a helicopter rescue impossible. The only option was a ground ascent from base camp. By that point, Wui Kin had spent nearly 2 days on the mountain, in the so-called death zone, at temperatures well below freezing, with a limited supply of oxygen in his bottles. Here's what Nirmal says. Try to imagine the situation. You are trapped at 7,500 meters in freezing cold and extreme conditions. After 2 days, you see a helicopter arriving with rescuers. You think the nightmare is over and you are going to be saved. But in the end, the helicopter flies away empty-handed. At 1 p.m., the rescue team led by Nirmal began moving upward toward the missing climber's location. At 2:30 p.m., they reached the fourth high camp at 7,100 meters. By 5:20 p.m., the rescue team had reached the Malaysian climber at around 7,500 meters. After providing first aid, they began a long descent back to the fourth camp, which they reached at around 10 p.m. In that camp, the rescuers and the injured climber rested for about 6 hours, and early the next morning, they began descending to the third camp, from where a rescue helicopter could pick him up. Unfortunately, the Malaysian climber later died in the hospital. The effects of oxygen deprivation and frostbite were too severe. As a result, Nirmal Purja, while participating in the rescue operation, missed the weather window for his next ascent. But he did not abandon his project. I think this case says a lot about him as a person. On May 12th, Nirmal Purja summited Dhaulagiri. On May 14th, he climbed the third highest mountain in the world, Kangchenjunga, and on May 22nd, he reached the highest point on Earth, Everest. At 3:45 p.m. that same day, he also summited Lhotse, setting a record for the fastest ascent of that peak combination. And then, it really took off. He completed the link-up of Everest, Lhotse, and Makalu in 48 hours and 30 minutes, which also became a new record. From an unknown retired soldier, he became something like a rock star of mountaineering. He drew attention from the media and the entire climbing community. At some point, however, he ran out of money. Of course, he had sponsors. He was filming a documentary about his ascents, and that brought in some funding. Some of the money also came from donations by friends and former military colleagues. He had mortgaged his house and invested £55,000 to start the project, but even that wasn't enough. These expeditions cost thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then the money ran out. Here is how Nirmal recalls it. It was a constant financial risk, one after another. I always said that I was only able to complete the project thanks to a miracle, but there was a trick to it. Nirmal was born in Nepal and therefore held a Nepali passport. However, during his military service, he obtained British citizenship. Nepal does not allow dual citizenship. Permits for climbing in Nepal, so-called climbing permits issued by the government for foreigners, cost tens of thousands of dollars. But this does not apply to Nepali citizens. So, during permit applications, Nirmal would suddenly remember that he was Nepali and pay significantly less, which later drew heavy criticism. At first, everything seemed to be going extremely well. Nirmal was actively summiting peaks and even took part once again in a rescue operation on Dhaulagiri, helping Indian climbers who had been caught in a snowstorm. However, his ascent pace was still extremely fast, and he was on track for a record. Then a problem arose. One of the 8,000ers, Shishapangma, is located in China, and the Chinese are known for being very strict when it comes to issuing climbing permits. That year, they didn't issue them at all. It was 2019, during the height of the pandemic, and as we remember, China took a very strict approach. No one was allowed in or out, especially not for climbing expeditions. Then the government of Nepal got involved, having clearly recognized Nims as a new national hero. At the highest level, they secured a special permit for him and his team. And on October 29, 2019, Nirmal Purja completed his project by summiting all 14 of the world's highest peaks in 6 months and 6 days. As mentioned earlier, the previous record was 7 years. It was a sensation and a triumph. Nirmal appeared in headlines across newspapers and magazines. In just one season, he went from an unknown retired soldier to one of the most famous mountaineers in the world. And to his credit, he monetized that success very effectively. First, on November 12, 2020, his book, Beyond Possible, was released, in which he tells his full autobiography. Second, during the project, his team filmed a documentary that was later purchased by Netflix. It is called 14 Peaks, Nothing is Impossible, and was released in November 2021. Both the book and the film brought him massive popularity. Riding this wave of hype, he founded a company called Elite Exped for commercial expeditions. Thanks to his media presence, it became quite successful. Nims gained 2 million followers on Instagram and became one of the most recognizable and media-driven figures in mountaineering. It is almost a cinematic success story, a barefoot boy from a Nepali village becoming one of the most famous climbers in the world. But along with fame came criticism. And there was a lot of it. He was criticized for using helicopters, for relying heavily on his team, and for being overly media-focused. In the mountaineering world, all of this is still considered bad form, and the criticism was genuinely abundant. To be fair, Nirmal Purja is a very ambitious guy, and it seems that after his success, he developed what you could call star syndrome instead of altitude sickness. He began getting angry at journalists who questioned his accounts, commented on a wide range of topics, and built an image of himself as a kind of superhero, which only made his critics even more irritated. To be fair, many of the stories he tells do sound like Hollywood scripts. For example, he claims that as a child he used to swim across mountain rivers to test his endurance and trained by carrying heavy stones, like in the movie Rocky. During his military service, he says a sniper shot at him and the bullet passed near his neck, hitting his rifle, leaving him completely uninjured. It almost sounds like a scene from a Western, where a bullet hits the sheriff's badge, while climbing 8,000ers is like walking a dog. And so on, and so on. And with stories like these and phrases that sound like they came from internet tough guy pages, Nirmal keeps pouring them out non-stop. And it is clear that he is not pretending. He genuinely holds a very high opinion of himself. As I mentioned, he responds very actively to criticism. He even went after the major mountaineering publication Explorer's Web when they questioned his accounts. But then Reinhold Messner stepped in, the living legend of mountaineering and the first person in history to complete all 14 8,000ers back in the 1980s. Nirmal met Messner near the 8,000er Nanga Parbat during the second phase of his climbs. This is how he describes that moment. He looked me in the eyes and said, "You can do it." He said it without even seeing any of my climbs. When he was climbing 8,000ers himself, the whole world didn't believe in him either, but he proved it was possible. Reinhold Messner gave him his support and said that Nirmal is a great mountaineer and that his achievements should not be questioned. After that, things calmed down a bit, and despite all the controversy, it has to be acknowledged that Nirmal is in exceptional physical condition and has a physiology that allows him to accomplish truly unique climbs. Here is how Dr. Ash Rutan comments on it. Without laboratory testing, it is difficult to say whether Nims' physiology is unique or not, but his recovery ability is definitely exceptional. However, until we have proper research data, any discussion on this topic remains speculation. But to be fair, during his record-setting project, he used supplemental oxygen and a team of Sherpas who carried oxygen cylinders for him. Something he was also heavily criticized for afterward. Here is how he responded to that criticism. "Yes, I use oxygen cylinders, but only from the high camp, because I believe I am strong enough to carry out a rescue if needed, and to stay alone with an injured climber at altitudes below 7,500 meters. Above 7,500 meters, I feel that my body no longer performs at the same level. So, in order to be able to help other climbers if necessary, I use oxygen cylinders." And as if responding directly to that criticism, in 2021, he made an oxygen-free winter first ascent of K2. This is an extremely impressive achievement. No one in the world had ever summited this extremely difficult peak in winter before. That year, many teams were competing for the record, including a Polish expedition led by Krzysztof Wielicki. But Nirmal was the first to succeed. However, even here, controversy followed. Some climbers accused Purja and his team of cutting fixed ropes behind them to prevent other teams from climbing and overtaking them. Although the following season the ropes were inspected and found to be intact. The accusations were unfounded. After that, Nims continued promoting mountaineering and advocating for the rights of guides and porters, pushing for fair and proper pay for their work. Until recently, Sherpas were paid around €6,000 per season. Thanks in part to Nims' efforts, their income has now increased to around $70,000 per year. Overall, Nirmal Purja became the most media-visible climber and something of a champion for fairness in the sport. However, in 2023, his record was challenged by Norwegian skier Kristin Harila, who in many ways was similar to Nirmal. Harila had no mountaineering experience until 2021, and was not a professional climber. But in 2023, she announced that she would break Nirmal's record. She secured sponsors and a huge amount of funding, assembled a large team of top Sherpas, and used helicopters for access to the base areas near the peaks. In the end, she completed all 14 8,000ers in 92 days. Nims had done it in 187 days, so the Norwegian climber effectively halved his record. At that point, one might think she would become the new queen of mountaineering, and Nirmal would lose his status. But the criticism Nirmal Purja faced was nothing compared to what Kristin Harila experienced. She was criticized for virtually everything: the use of helicopters, helicopter drops into base camps, fixed ropes, a massive support team, top Sherpas such as Tenzing Lama Sherpa, who later died in an avalanche on Shishapangma, huge financial backing, intense media exposure, and everything in between. But the most significant factor in the criticism was a viral video. It showed her K2 expedition, where her team stepped over a fallen porter without stopping to help. The man later died. He was only 27 years old. Kristin Harila's team successfully summited K2 and set a record for completing all 14 8,000ers in record time. They returned to base camp, threw a party, celebrated the achievement, and the porter died. But then the video appeared online. Headlines like "A record built on blood" were the mildest of what could be read. At some point, she likely regretted ever getting involved in it. Almost all media outlets wrote that commercial climbers were achieving records over the bodies of dead Sherpas and porters, that their records were bought, and so on, and so on. This record, instead of weakening Nirmal's position, actually worked in his favor. Compared to Kristin Harila, he appeared in a much more positive light. He continued collecting records and eventually completed all 14 8,000ers without supplemental oxygen. And the rather orthodox mountaineering community seemed to finally begin accepting him as a new legend of the sport. Now he faced different kinds of challenges. A boy from a mountain village became the owner of several highly successful businesses in expedition logistics and commercial climbing. His face was featured on Netflix. He had millions of Instagram followers and global recognition. It is important not to fall into an endless cycle of parties and social events. For example, the first person to reach Everest, Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, was unable to cope with this burden and struggled with alcoholism. And this brings us to the most recent events and a major scandal surrounding Nirmal Purja. It began in May 2024, when Nirmal and his team were once again preparing to summit Everest. Prior to that, the peak promotion team was planning to recover a body from the upper sections of the mountain. At some point, the peak promotion climbers radioed that they were unable to complete their mission due to a lack of fixed ropes. It is important to understand that fixing ropes is an enormous and extremely difficult task. At the beginning of the season, Sherpas usually set them up so that later climbers do not have to waste strength, time, or oxygen on it, and can carry lighter loads. After this, Nirmal Purja posted an angry video on social media, claiming that the ropes had been deliberately cut in order to sabotage his ascent. He accused the expedition industry of dirty politics. As we remember, he has been advocating for better pay for guides and Sherpas, and in recent years their salaries have indeed increased several times, largely due to his influence. Purja also noted that something similar had happened before on Annapurna, where there were no fixed ropes above 7,500 meters. However, Nirmal still completed that section, while another team turned back. In general, Nirmal clearly suggested that he had crossed paths with very powerful people, and that ropes were being cut on their orders in order to stop his ascent. Here is how he commented on it. It is very difficult to stay at the top when you are surrounded by nothing but envious people. And this is not the first time it has happened. They cut the ropes. As evidence, Nirmal Purja provided a video showing cut ropes. In addition, his claims were supported by another Sherpa from a different team. Sanu Sherpa, who was guiding a private client, also confirmed that below a section known as the balcony, the ropes had been cut. Here is how Nirmal responded. They thought I would stop, but my team replaced the missing rope and we continued the ascent. In the end, Nirmal still successfully summited Everest, and after descending, he sharply criticized Nepal's alpine industry. Local media immediately accused him of damaging Nepal's image, and the tourism department launched an investigation, claiming that he was deliberately spreading misinformation in order to gain attention. And it is quite possible that the ambitious climber really did step on some powerful toes, because just a few days after the rope-cutting scandal, on May 31st, 2024, Finnish climber and model Lotta Hines accused Nirmal of sexual harassment. According to her, he entered her hotel room in Kathmandu, forcibly undressed her, and exposed himself. The scandal was enormous, but it did not end there. Soon after, another climber appeared, American doctor April Leonardo, who claimed that during their joint K2 expedition, Nirmal entered her tent and began kissing her without her consent. April Leonardo was, incidentally, a commercial client of Elite Exped, the company owned by Nirmal. Nirmal Purja, of course, denied all the allegations. But the scandal showed no signs of dying down. One Nepali MP even suggested banning Nirmal from entering Nepal altogether. His relationship with the Nepali government has always been complicated. On one hand, they publicly present him as a Nepali climber who promotes mountaineering and, in turn, boosts the country's economy. On the other hand, he is a British citizen who lives in the United Kingdom and has openly criticized Nepal, especially its mountaineering industry. So, within the government, he is far from universally supported. He was quickly reminded of the recent rope-cutting scandal, of his use of a Nepali passport, despite questions over his eligibility and other controversies. Some of the most influential figures in the mountaineering community also rushed to publicly condemn Purja, emphasizing the importance of zero tolerance for any form of sexual misconduct. And they are absolutely right. But it raises a question. Why didn't the women report it immediately after coming down from the mountain? What were they waiting for? And why did all of this only surface after the rope-cutting scandal? Well-known climber Kilian Jornet also responded, acknowledging that the male-dominated mountaineering environment often forces victims into silence, and stressed the need for a safer and fairer culture in the sport. Purja was also condemned by several expedition companies, adventure consultants, AW Expeditions, and Climbing the Seven Summits. The Women in Mountaineering group also expressed their support for the victims and called for a change in the gender dynamics within mountaineering. After this, most sponsors turned away from Nirmal. Osprey Packs, a company that produces backpacks, ended its cooperation with him. They stated, "Osprey is aware of the recent allegations made against climber Nirmal Purja. He is no longer an Osprey ambassador." Nims was also an ambassador for the brand Scarpa. They posted the following message on their social media: "We recognize the importance of taking this matter seriously and responsibly, and we are awaiting further developments." One of the largest manufacturers of climbing hardware, Gravel, initially chose not to terminate its contract with Nirmal, which drew heavy criticism. Later, they also ended their cooperation. It is important to understand that climbers at Nirmal's level are heavily dependent on sponsorships. These partnerships allow them to carry out new ascents and launch new projects. And here, his financial situation suddenly deteriorated. On top of that, he was even threatened with being banned from entering Nepal, which would effectively end his climbing career. Sometime later, a rather harsh article was published in the New York Times, and after that article, Nirmal Purja was, as they say, widely cancelled. And at the moment, Nirmal Purja is one of the most media visible and at the same time one of the most heavily criticized mountaineers. That's just how it turned out. Of course, he denies all the allegations and says that this is the work of Nepal's alpine industry, for which he is like a thorn in the side. There is indeed a lot of money circulating there, and Nirmal Purja is not the most convenient figure for them. That is the story of Nirmal Purja's rise and fall. However, life goes on. Nirmal continues to go to the mountains, and I am sure we will not stop seeing him on magazine covers anytime soon. Despite all the accusations, he is undoubtedly an extremely strong mountaineer, and undoubtedly one of the greatest popularizers of mountaineering. He brought massive attention back to the sport, so I am sure we will hear about him again. As for the latest allegations, an investigation is currently underway. Is harassment present in mountaineering? Absolutely. There have been cases before, but it does seem somewhat strange that these accusations appeared right after claims about damage to Nepal's reputation and after the rope-cutting scandal. And that does make you think. Thank you for watching. Support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Take care of yourselves. See you next time.